Ted Bundy confessed to 30 murders. The real number is almost certainly higher, but behind every number is a name, a life, and a story that deserves more than a footnote in someone else's mythology. This video walks through 12 of his confirmed cases in the order they happened, starting with the one person who survived what he did and what survival actually cost her. Karen Sparks. On January 4th, 1974, an 18-year-old University of Washington student named Karen Sparks was asleep in her basement apartment in Seattle's University District. She never heard anyone come in. Bundy entered her home in the middle of the night, bludgeoned her with a metal rod from her own bed frame, and sexually assaulted her while she was unconscious. She survived. Technically, Karen Sparks woke up to a reality that would follow her for the rest of her life. Fractured skull, extensive internal injuries, permanent hearing loss, severe neurological damage that affected her memory, her cognition, and her ability to function normally for years. Decades of pain, surgeries, and rehabilitation followed what doctors would officially classify as survival, which is, a generous use of the word. Here's what makes this case uniquely terrifying compared to everything that came after. Almost every other victim on this list was lured, approached in public, charmed into a vehicle. Karen Sparks was attacked in her own bed, while she slept in her own home. There was no ruse, no fake cast, no, "Can you help me carry this?" Bundy simply broke in and attacked a sleeping woman. He was testing, figuring out what worked and what didn't. And the fact that she survived likely taught him the most important lesson of all. Next time, don't leave them alive. For years, most people didn't even know her name. Early reports called her Joni or just referred to her as an unnamed UW student, which caused massive confusion across sources about whether different accounts were even describing the same person. She eventually came forward publicly, identified herself as the woman attacked that night, became an accountant, and spent years advocating for victims of violent crime. She's widely regarded as Bundy's first known victim, and she's one of the only ones who lived to tell anyone about it. But if her attack was Bundy learning, then what came next was him putting those lessons into practice. Starting with a psychology student who vanished from her own bedroom just weeks later. Linda Ann Healy. Linda Ann Healy was a 21-year-old psychology major at the University of Washington. Senior year, she had a part-time job, a shared student house, a basement bedroom, and a life that was moving in a completely normal direction. And then one morning in late January 1974, her roommates woke up and she was just gone. But here's where it gets unsettling. The scene didn't look like a crime had happened. Her bed was made, her alarm clock was turned off. Everything looked tidy, like she'd simply gotten up and left for the day. It wasn't until someone pulled back the covers and found blood on the pillow and sheets that the reality set in. Someone had attacked her in the middle of the night, then taken the time to straighten the bedding and switch off the alarm before carrying her out of the house. Let that sit for a second. He bludgeoned a woman in her sleep in a basement bedroom of a house full of other people, and nobody heard a thing. Then, instead of fleeing, he stopped. He made the bed. He turned off the alarm so it wouldn't ring in the morning and prompt someone to check on her. He staged quiet normalcy over what was, minutes earlier, an act of extreme violence. This wasn't panic. This was calculated, deliberate work from someone who understood that the longer it took people to notice she was missing, the more distance he could put between himself and the crime. And it worked. Her roommates didn't suspect anything was wrong. The delay gave Bundy exactly what he needed. Her remains were later recovered at one of Bundy's known dump sites in Washington. But the detail that still gets people decades later isn't the violence itself. It's the made bed. It's the turned off alarm. It's the fact that this level of post-attack staging suggests someone who was already frighteningly composed from the very beginning. Not a killer learning as he went. A killer who showed up fully formed, but if Linda's case is disturbing because of what was left behind, the next one is disturbing because of what wasn't. Donna Manson vanished so completely that her remains have never been found. Donna Manson. Most of Bundy's victims left something behind. A crime scene, remains, personal effects. Something that investigators could point to and say, this happened here. Donna Gail Manson left nothing. On March 12, 1974, the 19-year-old Evergreen State College student walked out of her dorm in Olympia, Washington, heading toward a concert on campus. She never made it, and from that moment forward, Donna Manson essentially ceased to exist in any physical, verifiable way. No body, no clothing, no belongings, nothing. Here's where it gets complicated. When she first disappeared, nobody was even sure a crime had been committed. Her family and authorities genuinely considered the possibility that she'd run away, or gotten lost, or simply decided to start over somewhere. which in 1974 wasn't an unreasonable assumption for a 19-year-old. But as more women started vanishing from college campuses across Washington, that explanation started looking less like optimism and more like denial. Bundy eventually confessed to abducting and killing her, sat down, looked investigators in the eye, and told them he did it. But when they asked him where he left her remains, he either couldn't remember or wouldn't say. Which is, not ideal when you're trying to bring closure to a grieving family. And that's the tension that makes this case impossible to fully resolve. Bundy's confession fits his pattern perfectly. Young woman, college campus, Washington State, spring of 1974. Every single detail lines up. But you're still relying entirely on the word of a man who manipulated everyone around him for sport. A man who lied when the truth would have been easier. Without a single piece of physical evidence to corroborate what he said, Donna Manson remains a ghost in the timeline. Present on every list of his victims, but absent from the earth in a way that no confession can fix. Her family never got a body to bury. Investigators never got a crime scene to process. All anyone got was the word of a serial killer and the quiet, permanent absence of a girl who walked to a concert and vanished into nothing. But if Donna Manson's disappearance is haunting because of what was never found, the next victim is disturbing because of what Bundy did in plain sight. Susan Rancourt. Susan Rancourt did exactly what you or I would do. Someone walks up to you on a college campus with their arm in a sling, asks you to help carry something to their car, and you help. That's not naivety. That's just being a decent person. And Bundy knew it. On April 17, 1974, Susan Elaine Rancourt was an 18-year-old student at Central Washington State College in Ellensburg. She was walking across campus that evening and simply never came back. No struggle anyone witnessed, no scream anyone heard. She was just gone. Here's where it gets unsettling. After Bundy was eventually identified, witnesses came forward remembering a man on or near campus that same night. A guy with a sling or a cast asking young women if they could help him carry some books to his car. Some of them said no or walked away. Susan didn't. She stopped to help a stranger who looked like he needed it, which is, not ideal, and that's the part that makes this case crawl under your skin. Bundy didn't overpower her with brute force. He didn't ambush her in a dark alley. He engineered the entire interaction. The fake injury was premeditated. The helpless act was rehearsed. He sat down and thought about how to make a young woman feel safe enough to walk toward danger voluntarily. That's not impulsive violence. That's social engineering with a body count. Her remains were later recovered at one of Bundy's known disposal sites in Washington, the same area where other victims from this period were found. He'd been using the same location like a filing cabinet for the dead, just returning to the same spot over and over. Rancourt's case is one of the clearest early examples of the injured man ruse that Bundy would go on to use repeatedly. The cast, the crutches, the polite requests for help. Every single element designed to short-circuit the part of your brain that says something's wrong and activate the part that says this person needs me. He turned human empathy into a weapon, and it worked almost every time. But if you think operating on a single college campus was bold enough for Bundy, wait until you hear how far he was willing to travel for his next victim. Roberta Kathy Parks. Most of Bundy's early victims were taken and killed within the same general area. A grab near campus, a drive to a Ural through a rural dump site, done within hours. Kathy Parks was different. She was 250 miles away from his usual hunting ground, and he brought her back alive. Roberta Kathleen Parks was a 20-year-old student at Oregon State University in Corvallis, Oregon. On May 6, 1974, she walked out of her dormitory and was never seen alive again. Now, if you've been paying attention, every victim so far has been in Washington State. Parks was in Oregon. And that matters, because Bundy didn't kill her there. He put her in his car, tied up and gagged, and drove her approximately 250 miles north back to Washington. Let that sit for a second. That's roughly a 4-hour drive. 4 hours with a conscious, restrained human being in your vehicle. Every gas station you pass, every stoplight, every other driver glancing over at your car. He did that and felt comfortable doing it. This wasn't a crime of impulse or opportunity that spiraled. This was logistics, planning, sustained captivity measured in highway miles. Her remains were eventually found on Taylor Mountain near Seattle, the same rural disposal site where multiple other early victims ended up. Bundy himself counted Parks among his Washington victims, not his Oregon ones. He categorized by where he killed, not where he took them, which is a detail that tells you everything about how his mind worked. But here's the part that made this case a nightmare for investigators. By abducting in one state and killing in another, Bundy exploited something that barely gets talked about. The near-total lack of interstate communication between police departments in the 1970s. Oregon cops are looking for a missing girl. Washington cops have unrelated disappearances. Nobody's comparing notes because there's no system to compare notes with. He essentially fragmented the investigation just by crossing a state line. Not because he was a genius, but because the infrastructure to catch someone like him simply didn't exist yet. Parks' case proves he wasn't just violent, he was methodical. He understood jurisdictions the way a chess player understands the board, and he used geography as a weapon. But if you think a 250-mile drive is bold, wait until you hear about the victim who vanished from a bar and was never seen again. Brenda Ball. Most of Bundy's victims up to this point share a common thread: college campuses, dorms, walkways between Greek houses, lecture halls, places where young women moved through predictable routines in environments they trusted. Brenda Ball breaks that pattern completely. On the night of June 1st, 1974, Brenda was at the Flame Tavern in Burien, Washington. She'd gone to watch a band perform, the kind of low-key night out that thousands of people had every single weekend. She was 22 years old, she was enjoying herself, and at some point late that night, she left the bar. And then she was just gone. Nobody saw her leave with anyone. No friends could account for where she went after stepping out. She walked out of a crowded social venue and vanished into thin air, which is a phrase that gets thrown around a lot in true crime, but in Brenda's case, it's almost literal. One moment she existed in a room full of people, and the next moment she didn't. I don't know what to tell you. Here's what makes her case important beyond the obvious tragedy. Brenda Ball proves that Bundy wasn't locked into one hunting ground. He wasn't just the campus predator, he was scanning everywhere. Bars, parking lots, anywhere a young woman might find herself momentarily alone. The Flame Tavern was a public populated space, and he still found a window. That's not just opportunism, that's a predator who understood isolation on a granular level. You don't need an empty street, you just need 30 seconds where nobody's watching. Her remains were eventually found on Taylor Mountain, the same disposal site where other victims had been dumped. Bundy kept going back to the same spot like it was a storage unit, which is, not ideal. What's worth noting is how little attention Brenda's case gets compared to the campus abductions. Bundy acknowledged her murder, but offered researchers almost nothing beyond the basic admission. So her story gets reconstructed from investigative records rather than from his words, which means it's simultaneously well confirmed and frustratingly sparse on detail. She deserves more than a footnote, but the evidence left behind doesn't give us much to build on. But if her case shows Bundy adapting his approach, the next victim shows just how terrifyingly precise he could be when he went back to familiar territory. Georgianne Hawkins. Georgianne Hawkins was 18 years old, walking a path she had walked 100 times before. The distance between the fraternity house she just left and her sorority house was barely anything. A few steps through an alley in the middle of the University of Washington's Greek Row, surrounded on both sides by houses full of people. Hundreds of students within earshot. She never made it. On June 11th, 1974, Georgianne stepped into that alley and vanished. No scream, no commotion, no witnesses who saw anything useful. Just a girl who was there 1 second and gone the next, swallowed whole by a gap between two buildings she'd passed through countless times. Here's where it gets chilling. Bundy later described exactly how he did it. He was waiting in that alley with a fake injury, crutches, or a cast, and asked her for help. The same routine. But what makes this one different is the speed. He incapacitated her within seconds of her stepping close enough. She didn't have time to process what was happening, let alone scream. The whole thing was over before it started. This wasn't a woman walking alone through an empty parking lot at 2 a.m. This was a busy campus neighborhood on a weeknight, lights on in windows, people awake in every direction. The sheer density of human beings meant absolutely nothing. Her disappearance hit different than the ones before it. The media latched onto the details, the impossibly short distance, the populated area, the total absence of evidence, and for the first time, the public started connecting dots. Young women had been vanishing across Washington for months, and Georgianne's case was the one that made people realize something systematic was happening. Someone was hunting. Her remains were never positively identified. In his pre-execution confessions, Bundy claimed he'd left bones at his Issaquah dump site and named her explicitly, walking investigators through the abduction with a level of detail that was nauseating in its casualness. He talked about it like he was describing a commute. But the remains could never be conclusively confirmed as hers. Georgianne Hawkins effectively disappeared from the face of the earth in a 100-foot stretch of alley and was never truly found. The distance between where she said goodbye to her friends and where she would have been safe was roughly 100 feet. That's it. And Bundy filled that gap in seconds. But if you think the brazenness stops here, wait until you hear about what he pulled at Lake Sammamish. In broad daylight, in front of thousands of people. Janice OTT. July 14th, 1974, Lake Sammamish State Park. Thousands of people are out enjoying a beautiful summer day, families, couples, groups of friends, and Ted Bundy decided this was the perfect place to go hunting. Let that sink in for a second. Not a dark alley, not an empty campus at 2 a.m., a packed public park in the middle of the afternoon with thousands of witnesses everywhere. The audacity of this is genuinely hard to wrap your head around. Here's how it went down. Bundy showed up wearing a sling on his arm and started approaching women, introducing himself and asking for help loading a sailboat onto his car. And he used his real first name. Just walked up to strangers and said, "Hi, I'm Ted," which is, not exactly criminal mastermind behavior, but that's what makes it so unsettling. He was so confident in his ability to manipulate people that he didn't even bother with an alias. Here's the thing. Most people don't realize about that day. Multiple women turned him down. He approached several people with the same sailboat story before anyone agreed. Some of them said no because they were busy. Some because something felt off. Those women went home that night without ever knowing how close they came to not going home at all. The randomness of who survived and who didn't is genuinely gut-wrenching. One woman says yes instead of no, and that's it. That's the entire difference between living and dying. Janice Ott was the one who said yes. She agreed to help this seemingly injured stranger with his boat, and multiple witnesses watched her walk off toward the parking lot with him. Nobody intervened because why would they? A woman helping a guy with a sling carry something to his car. That's just being a nice person. But here's where Bundy's boldness became his undoing. Because he did all of this in front of witnesses, lots of them. And every single one of those people remembered the guy named Ted with the cast asking for help with a sailboat. That description, that name, those details became critical evidence that helped investigators narrow their suspect pool and eventually identify him. His most brazen attack created the exact testimony that would come back to haunt him. Janice's remains were later found in wooded areas east of Seattle, alongside those of another woman taken from that very same park on that very same day, and if you think one abduction from a crowded park in broad daylight is disturbing, wait until you hear what happened just hours later. Denise Naslund. Here's what makes this one hit different. Everything we just covered about Janice Ott, the sailboat routes, the broad daylight approach, the thousands of witnesses. Bundy did all of that, and then came back for seconds. Denise Marie Naslund was 19 years old, a computer programming student enjoying a summer afternoon at Lake Sammamish State Park on July 14, 1974. She was there with her boyfriend and friends. Normal day, sun, water, crowds everywhere. At some point in the afternoon, she got up to use the restroom. She never came back. That's the entire window. A trip to the restroom, not a late-night walk through an empty parking lot, not a solo hike through the woods. A bathroom break at a public park surrounded by thousands of people on a sunny July afternoon. And somehow, in that small gap between leaving her group and reaching the facilities, Bundy got her away from the park entirely. But here's the kicker. This happened hours after he'd already taken Janice Ott from the same park. He had successfully abducted one woman from a crowd of thousands, and instead of disappearing, he drove back to the exact same location and did it again. The same park, the same afternoon, the same crowd that had already watched him approach multiple women with a fake sling. The audacity required to return to an active hunting ground where people had already seen your face, already heard your name, already watched you walk off with someone who never came back. That's not just confidence, that's something else entirely. Naslund's remains were found in September 1974, recovered from wooded areas east of Seattle alongside Janice Ott's, two women taken from the same park on the same day, dumped in the same stretch of forest. The pairing makes Lake Sammamish the single most brazen day in Bundy's entire criminal timeline, and that's a timeline with zero shortage of brazen days. And what makes Naslund's case particularly devastating is how ordinary her last free moment was. She didn't accept help from a stranger. She didn't walk off with someone she just met. She went to the bathroom. The sheer mundanity of the action that separated her from safety speaks to something deeply uncomfortable about how predators operate. It wasn't about what Denise did. It was about the fact that Bundy was there, watching, waiting for any gap at all. Everyone assumes someone else is paying attention. Nobody thinks twice about a person walking through a crowd, and Bundy understood that better than anyone. But if you think the Lake Sammamish attacks represented some kind of peak, Bundy was just getting started in a brand new state. Melissa Smith. Most serial killers have a territory, a comfort zone, a handful of streets they know like the back of their hand. Bundy had that too for a while. Washington State, specifically the Seattle area and surrounding college towns. He knew the campuses, the parks, the roads leading to Taylor Mountain where he dumped body after body. Then he enrolled in law school at the University of Utah. And he brought everything with him. Melissa Ann Smith was 17 years old when she disappeared on October 18, 1974 from the Midvale area of Utah. Not a college student, not someone walking between sorority houses, a high schooler. That distinction matters because up until this point, Bundy's confirmed victims had been women in their late teens to early 20s, almost exclusively tied to university life. Melissa was younger. Here's where it gets unsettling beyond the obvious. Bundy had been in Utah for barely any time at all. He relocated to a brand new state, enrolled in a completely different school, surrounded himself with an entirely new social circle, and just kept killing. Zero adjustment period. He moved to Salt Lake City and picked up exactly where he left off in Washington, like a guy transferring offices and not missing a single day of work, which is, not ideal. Bundy later included Melissa among 8 Utah homicides he confessed to. 8 in one state. Investigators linked her murder to him through modus operandi, timeline, and physical evidence, all matching the patterns he'd established hundreds of miles away. Same approach, same brutality, different zip code. And that's the thing about Melissa's case that sticks with you. It proves Bundy's methods were portable. He could cross state lines and deploy his entire predatory playbook in a place where nobody knew his face. For law enforcement, this was a nightmare. Washington investigators were looking for a killer in Washington. Nobody was connecting those disappearances to a new string of murders in Utah because why would they? Different state, different jurisdiction, different everything, but her age deserves attention too. At 17, she was younger than the women he'd been targeting in the Pacific Northwest. His victim profile was broadening, not dramatically, but enough to signal that whatever internal criteria he used to select targets were loosening. That trajectory would eventually reach its most horrifying conclusion with his final confirmed kill years later. Melissa Smith was a teenager who should have been worrying about homework and college applications. Instead, she became proof that geography meant nothing to Ted Bundy. But if Melissa's case shows Bundy could relocate without skipping a beat, his next victim proves he could do it again, this time in Colorado under circumstances that would eventually lead to his arrest. Corinne Campbell. Up until this point, Bundy's hunting grounds had a pattern: college campuses, parks, bars near universities. Corinne Campbell's case throws all of that out the window. She was 23 years old, staying at the Wildwood Inn in Snowmass, Colorado, just outside Aspen, a ski resort. She was there on vacation with her fiancé and his children. This wasn't a woman walking alone across a dark campus at midnight. This was a family trip. In January 1975, Campbell left her hotel room to grab a magazine. The trip should have taken 2 minutes. She never came back. Her fiancé waited. Then he worried. Then he searched. Corinne Campbell had vanished from a hallway in a ski resort hotel, surrounded by vacationing families, and nobody saw a thing. Weeks later, her nude body was found along a dirt road near Snowmass. She'd been bludgeoned. The assault was consistent with Bundy's methods in every way that mattered. And here's where her case becomes legally crucial, because this was the one that nearly stopped everything. Colorado prosecutors built their case around Campbell's murder. They had forensic evidence. They had his presence in the area. They had a case that could have put him away for good, because Bundy escaped twice. First from a courthouse in Aspen, where he jumped from a second-story window, then from a jail in Glenwood Springs, where he crawled through a ceiling. After that second escape, he disappeared to Florida, where everything got significantly worse. But what sticks with you about Campbell's case isn't the legal drama, it's the math. She left a room where her fiancé was sitting with his kids. She walked down a hotel hallway, and somewhere between that door and a magazine rack, Bundy found her. The entire interaction probably lasted less than 5 minutes. That's what made him so dangerous. He didn't need a dark alley or an empty parking lot. He just needed a moment. A single, ordinary moment where someone was briefly alone in a place they had every reason to feel safe. The ski resort setting proved something investigators had been slowly realizing. Bundy wasn't tied to any environment: campuses, state park, taverns, hotel hallways. He read spaces the way most people read a menu, scanning for the easiest option, and he moved on it before anyone noticed he was there. Campbell's murder should have been the end of his story. Colorado had him. They had the charges, they had the evidence, but Bundy crawled through a ceiling, and a 12-year-old girl in Florida paid the price for it. If you think that sentence is hard to read, wait until you hear what happened to her. Kimberly Leach. Everything before this was horrifying, but this one is different. Kimberly Diane Leach was 12 years old, a 7th grader, and on February 9th, 1978, Ted Bundy kidnapped her from her junior high school in Lake City, Florida, in broad daylight. Not from a bar, not from a dark alley behind a sorority house, not from a hiking trail or a hotel hallway, from a school. A place where a 12-year-old is supposed to be safe. Where parents drop their kids off every morning without a second thought. Here's the thing about where Bundy was at this point. He had escaped from Colorado custody, twice actually. The second time he made it all the way to Florida. Traveling under assumed identities completely off the radar, and instead of disappearing quietly, instead of laying low and starting over, he did the opposite. He spiraled. The Chi Omega sorority attacks at Florida State University happened just weeks before Leach's abduction. He was attacking multiple people in rapid succession, barely sleeping, stealing cars, using fake names. This wasn't the calculated, charm-offensive Bundy from Washington anymore. This was a man in freefall, and he was more dangerous than ever because a calculated predator picks targets he can isolate using rehearsed tactics. A desperate one takes a child from a school. Kimberly's remains were found on April 7th, approximately 30 miles west of Lake City, nearly 2 months of a family not knowing, which is, not ideal. Her case shattered the last comfortable lie people told themselves about Bundy: that he had a type, that his victims were college-aged women in specific settings, that there was some kind of pattern you could protect yourself against. Kimberly Leach proved that none of that mattered. He would take anyone, anywhere. If the opportunity existed, he would exploit it. She was 12, and she was at school, and it didn't matter. Her murder became central to one of Bundy's 2 Florida death sentences. And because it went through a full capital trial with witness testimony, forensic evidence, and meticulous legal scrutiny, it's one of the most thoroughly documented cases in his entire series. The jury convicted him, the court sentenced him to death. And on January 24, 1989, that sentence was carried out. Bundy confessed to 30 homicides in total before his execution. 30. But investigators believe the real number is higher. Some estimates push it significantly beyond that, and the truth is, we'll probably never have a definitive count. There are unnamed victims, unidentified remains, cases in states he passed through that were never formally closed. The 12 victims covered in this video are confirmed, they are documented, they are real people with real names and real lives that were stolen from them, but they are not the complete picture. They might not even be close. Kimberly Diane Leach was the last confirmed victim in a timeline that almost certainly extends further than anyone can fully document. She was 12 years old, and there is nothing else to say about that. If you enjoyed this video and want to see more, click the video on the screen now.